Hey, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Jessica Hobson. Dr. Hobson is the clinical director of the Family Guidance and Therapy Center in Petaluma, where she provides therapy to families and individuals, helping them navigate a wide range of mental health and developmental challenges. Since 2013, she has also been a valued lecturer at Sonoma State University, teaching across the departments of psychology, philosophy, early childhood studies, and counseling. Before joining SSU, Dr. Hobson spent 11 years as a senior research fellow at the Institute of Child Health, University College London, contributing to important research in child development. She earned her PhD in child clinical psychology from the University of Miami in 2001. In addition, she holds 2 bachelor degrees, one in psychology and one in philosophy, because she saw the value and complementary potential in both fields. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jessica Hobson.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to participate in this series of talks. I'm delighted to be here. And the title of my talk today is Being in Relationship with Self and Others. So we're going to start with a developmental model, and it's an approach that goes from the outside in. And this model is reflected in, I just need to actually move this out of the way. Okay, so I can see my quotes. All right, this model is reflected in some quotes I'm going to share with you. The first is G.H. Mead, a philosopher, sociologist, and psychologist, who described how our sense of self develops through interaction with others and our ability to take on their perspective. So it's an internalization of the perspectives of others that we develop through interaction with them. Lev Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist who developed the sociocultural theory, described how in the process of development, the child begins to practice with respect to himself the same forms of behavior that others formerly practiced with respect to him. In other words, an internalization of relationship. What starts out between people becomes within the person, becomes the mind. And in fact, Vygotsky's ideas are applied to language, symbolic thinking, play, many forms of development. But for today, we'll be focusing specifically on the development of attachment for the first half of this talk. And John Bowlby, the developer of attachment theory, a British psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, described how the more sensitive the caregiver is to the infant's signals and needs, the more secure the attachment is likely to be. So what we see represented in each of these quotes is a developmental idea that what happens between people becomes internalized within the child's own mind. And in fact, the very nature and quality of their mind with respect to self arises from interactions with others. So we're going to focus for today, for this part of the talk, on developing this idea of outside in with attachment theory. And according to attachment theory developed by John Bowlby, early bonding experiences between the infant and caregivers, that very early infant care, promotes different qualities of attachment for a child, and those styles set templates for future relationships. It's important to keep in mind that these early experiences are not set up in episodic or narrative memory because they happen before the child has words. They actually develop in implicit memory. So these are emotional memories that are within us viscerally in our bodies, in our emotions, before we have language and words to describe those memories. But these early patterns set the stage for our ability as we develop to tolerate emotion, to soothe ourselves, and even to have an integrated sense of self later in life. So in other words, healthy co-regulation with and through interactions with our primary caregivers set the stage for us to be able to regulate our own emotions, our self-regulation, and have secure attachment. This is depicted in the circle of security, the attachment relationship as it begins, in that a young child both needs to explore the world on the one hand and have a secure base to which to return who will comfort them when distressed or afraid on the other hand. So you have the child's need to be able to move away from the parent and know they're being watched over, enjoyed, delighted in as they move away. And when there are challenges and emotional distress, sadness, pain, that the child can go to their secure base for comfort. And a big part of that comfort is having feelings and experiences named, validated, and importantly, accepted. So I'm going to share with you a very quick 2-minute clip from a procedure called the strange situation. This procedure was developed by Mary Ainsworth, who worked with John Bowlby, as a way of measuring attachment styles, specifically in toddlers during the period of their lives when they experience separation anxiety. Because at this particular time of life, between about 10 and 15 months, when the caregiver leaves the room and the child is left alone or with a stranger, this is especially distressing and upsetting. And we're interested when mom returns in the child's recovery with the mother. So let me just move this along. We're not going to watch the whole video. I'm going to start it just at the beginning of the strange situation procedure, and we'll watch that until the mother returns.
Are investigating. 14-month Zachary is about to experience a series of separations and reunions that are designed to activate the baby human's attachment behavior. At this age, strangers make the baby human feel anxious. At the entrance of the researcher, Zachary heads over to his mother for safety. See the shapes? His mother reassures him and redirects his attention toward the toys. Go in the bucket. When the researcher tries to engage Zachary in play, it increases his stress, which makes him hold on to his mother for security. Together? Gradually, he relaxes and begins to play with the researcher. Yeah, now they're going to school. The next stage of the study involves his mother leaving the room. This one's Zachary tries to follow her. And when she disappears, Zachary is inconsolable. It's okay. He wants his mommy. Zachary's distress at separation from his mother is actually a sign of healthy attachment. When his mother returns, his tears instantly subside. Oh, no. Researchers pay special attention to the moment when the child is reunited with the parent. What's here? Let's see. Should we do the donuts? The way Zachary's mother comforts him and directs his attention away from his distress and his willingness to follow her lead tells them that he is a securely attached child. Okay, so I just want to go on to the next slide. So when we administer the strange situation procedure to toddlers, what you see with Zachary are the hallmark features of secure attachment. So when his mother left the room, he was obviously distressed, but when she returned, he was able to go to her for comfort. She was able to soothe him, and then he was able to feel comforted and soothed back to baseline, back into that ventral vagal state of safety within his nervous system, so he could then return to exploring the toys. In early childhood, we also see different patterns in the strange situation. One of those patterns is referred to as anxious ambivalence. In this pattern, when the mother returns, the child is highly distressed and will go for comfort, but is not soothed by the comfort the parent may provide. So you might see, for example, mother holding the baby and the baby arching their back and kicking or even hitting the mother, maybe throwing something. But when the mom puts the baby down, they won't go back to the toys. They cling for dear life just in case mom might leave the room again. So they need to become in this state of hypervigilance, monitoring for the possibility they might be abandoned and not trusting mom
to stay, and they're seeking comfort, but they're not able to be comforted. So they stay in this heightened state of arousal, known as anxious ambivalence, in this young early childhood attachment style. The other style that we see with young children in the strained situation procedure is called anxious avoidance. And in this style, what you often see is the child looking away. Sometimes they may not even cry. They may act like they didn't mind the parent left the room. And when mom returns, this is what's key to the anxious avoidant presentation, is that they may actively turn their back. If mom comes over, they might look down. And the message is, you know what? I'm fine without you. Don't need you. Stay away. I'm doing okay by myself. As it turns out, though, if you look at these children's cortisol levels and heart rate, they're highly aroused. They're just in a state of kind of dampening down, almost like that freeze response of hypoarousal, kind of in a way pretending that they're okay when there's a lot of turmoil underneath. And so in both the anxious ambivalent and the anxious avoidant presentation, the child is not soothed or comforted, and they're not really able to return to a state of baseline. Now, the single biggest predictor of attachment security is something that traditionally was referred to as maternal sensitivity. In the early work, Ainsworth called this contingent appropriate responsiveness of the caregiver. And this is the caregiver's ability to notice, attend to, and interpret the infant's signals in a way that's appropriate and prompt. This has been more recently elaborated in quite a lot of research, and the same terms refer basically to this capacity of the caregiver to observe and reflect upon the infant's inner world. So this is sometimes referred to as mentalization, mindsight, reflective functioning, and there's been a lot of research on the idea of mindedness. And this does link very much with what Mary Gomes presented on last week about that ability to be aware of the subjective experience of the other. So here we have repeated experience throughout infancy of a sensitive, loving caregiver reflecting accurately on your internal mental states, which leads to the capacity of the infant to trust others and over time to gradually become more aware of their own mental states as well as those of others. So I want to share 2 short videos to really give you a feel for what that's like when a caregiver has a hard time with mind-mindedness or sensitive attunement to a baby's distress.
Parents often react inconsistently to their baby's distress. Sometimes they can be loving, other times they are angry, and at other times they may ask their child to worry about them. Watch this mother's response to her child's crying.
Stop that! I don't want you to do that. Stop it again.
Here's another example.
Honey, you scared me. I thought something terrible had happened. Come here now. Mommy was just so scared. Make mommy feel better. Give mommy a hug. Make mommy feel better.
As you can see, once when this baby hurt himself, his mother got angry.
Stop that.
And another time, the mother got more upset than the baby.
Scared me. I thought something terrible had happened.
By doing that, whether she meant to or not, the message the mom gave her baby was that her own needs were more important than her baby's. These babies stop going to their parents for comfort because they don't want to upset their parents. It's important to remember it's not up to a baby to meet a parent's needs. It's the other way around. It's up to you to meet your baby's needs. A child who gets a loving response only some of the time has to work very hard, often by clinging and whining to get their mother's attention. They don't know what to expect from their parent and are not sure how to get love and affection. They can become very demanding. In the long term, children who are unsure about themselves and their parents are likely to have problems getting along with other people.
Staying home a day?
Here's another way this mother could have responded to her child. See how this time the mom focuses on the baby's needs. See how she paid attention to her baby, calmly picked him up, held him close, and reassured him. She responded to her child in a loving way, And a baby whose parent responds in this loving way learns that he can count on his parent to be there when he needs her. Babies whose mothers respond in a loving way learn to trust that their needs will be respected and valued. And they, in turn, learn to respect and value other people's needs. In other words, they can go on to form good, close relationships with their parents and with others.
Here's the second one.
Watch how this mother responds when her child hurts himself.
You know what? Please don't cry. Are you finished?
The baby is signaling he's hurt and he needs comfort. But by making light of his pain, getting annoyed, or trying to distract him from his pain, his mom is, in effect, rejecting him. Whether she means to or not, her response says, "Your pain isn't important to me. You aren't important to me. Get over your pain. Don't bother me with it." That may not be what she means to tell her baby, but that's how he is going to feel. He'll think, "I'm not worthy of love, care, and affection, and I can't count on her to make me feel better." What happens to babies whose mothers respond in this kind of rejecting way? They learn eventually to keep their feelings to themselves because they're afraid that their attempts to get reassurance will be laughed at, teased, or rejected, or will make their parents angry. That makes it hard, if not impossible, for them to develop close, loving relationships with their parents and with other people because they don't feel worthy of love or affection. Watch how the same situation, responded to differently, will send another message to the baby. See how this time the mother picks him up, holds him close, and calms him while acknowledging that she knows he's hurt. What this tells him is that mom knows I'm hurt and helps me feel better. I'm worthy of her love and attention. This child knows he can count on mom to help him feel better. A child secure in the love of his parent will soon be able to calm himself down when he's hurt. He'll also start to develop a sense of how to make someone else feel better. To feel how someone else must feel when they're hurt and to have an understanding of how to help them is an important part of an emotionally healthy child, adult, and future parent. And it's something your child learns from you by how you respond when he's hurt, ill, or upset.
All right, so caregivers, through mind-mindedness, through mentalization, empathy, reflective functioning, and as you're about to see in a moment, an example of emotion coaching, are facilitating the child's capacity for an understanding of their own self-awareness and the emotions and mental states of other people. And I'm going to share with you one final video. And this is a video put together by the Gottmans, and you might be familiar with their research on marital relationships and the 4 horsemen predicting divorce. And they also do work, it's a little bit less well-known, on parent-child relationships. And one of their terms is emotion coaching, which is very similar to mind-mindedness and mentalization. So I'd like to share this final video with you in the series.
My daughter helped me be a really good father. I learned from her how to be a good parent because I learned how to listen to her. Basically, what we've been doing is looking at how the way parents talk to kids develops their emotional intelligence.
If children can be encouraged not to dismiss their emotions or shut them out, but to really listen to themselves and learn how to put their feelings into words and empathize with others' feelings, that's emotional intelligence. Most grown-ups weren't raised with emotion coaching parents, so they just don't know what to say, they don't know what to do.
The biggest emotional challenges that children face is when they go to school. It's so overwhelming, and creating those friendships and connections with teachers and with other kids, that's the important challenge.
We have specialized tools to really give the words to use and the steps to take to support children emotionally. listen to the child, try to feel what that child is experiencing, and then put that sense of what the child is feeling into words. Secondly, validate the child's right to have those feelings. And third, treat the child with dignity.
Teaching is really a very personal relationship between a teacher and a child. And it requires trust. And when that trust exists, then the child wants to learn from the teacher.
If educators used the tools that we teach for developing emotional intelligence in children, the kids would have much better focus of attention. The kids would have healthier relationships with other peers in the schools.
If you focus only on discipline, you get obedient children. If you focus on emotion coaching as well, then you get kids who really know who they are and want to excel and also want to connect with other people.
Okay, so towards the end of the second year of life, after repeated experiences of interacting with caregivers who hopefully provide emotion coaching, mind-mindedness, reflective functioning, and mentalization, the child builds a representation of themselves, others, and the world. And if that's a secure attachment they've developed, they begin to feel within themselves that they're worthy of attention and love, and that others are trustworthy, and that the world is safe. So this would be the representation of the internal working model where secure attachment has been developed. And what happens by this phase when attachment has moved inside us is that we actually have an internal working model or a representation that we can then carry over as a pattern into other relationships. Now, Bowlby didn't say this pattern that you develop at 18 months lasts the rest of your life. There's certainly ways in which this has changed and altered and much more dynamic than is being presented here, but there is a template early on that's formed. And one of the ways in which this template can be shifted if a child starts off with early insecure attachment or trauma during early childhood is something called earned security. And traditionally in psychology, we've thought about earned attachment security as something you might come to develop through healthy relationships, say with a grandparent or a teacher, a different caregiver, a really close friendship, a romantic partner, even a therapist. And we've talked about earned security as something we can develop through healthy relationships with others, even if we didn't start off with secure attachment in life. However, I'm going to flip things around a little bit, and we're going to shift to taking this story instead of outside in, we're going to look at it from the inside out. So the question is there a way to build secure attachment from within? And I put this little nod up to Mary Gomes's presentation. So you might remember last week with the concentric circles, and in the center was the self. And we're going to go right to that self, but then within the self. And because we have a limited amount of time today, I will only be able to explore and introduce these ideas briefly. But if you're interested, I recommend the books No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz and You Are the One You've Been Waiting For, Applying Internal Family Systems to Intimate Relationships, again by Dick Schwartz. So this model, the internal family systems model, was developed by Dick Schwartz. And in his clinical work, he discovered that in addition to external family systems, he was a family therapist, that within each of our own psyches, we have something like a family system. And this developed into the concept of parts. So we're born with these subpersonalities or parts. That's not pathological. It's actually very healthy and part of being who we are. These are parts that interact with each other and with the world. And if you pay attention, you might hear these parts as inner voices. The thing that happens, though, is that some of these parts can take on extreme roles in order to protect us from wounds that we've experienced, especially in our childhoods. And when they try to protect us, Sometimes they can do so in ways that are less than optimal. Often it's because they figured out like ways to do this in the best way that they could during our childhood, when we didn't really have very healthy mechanisms and we had to deal as best we could with really hard circumstances. And there are 3 types of parts, which I'll go into in a moment, but we have the parts that carry the initial hurts or the wounds. These are often very young parts of ourselves. You might think of an inner child, which I'll come to in a bit. We have parts that prevent wounds from getting triggered. These are called our managers, and this might be the part of you that anxiously overworks or is a perfectionistic or self-critic, doing lots of organizing and trying to make sure everything is okay. And then we have parts that pop up when the pain emerges, and that might be rage, it might be shutting down and procrastinating, it might be self-harm, it might be substance abuse. And these firefighters kind of try to come up and put out the pain. And then we also have within each of us an essence or an inner wisdom. And this part is not really a part, it is the self. And harmony within us internally can actually occur when the self is the leader, when the self is the attachment figure and all the parts have connection and access to the self. Unfortunately, there are conditions in which our capacity to have access to the self can become blurred. So when you have managers that are trying to control life so that you don't feel pain, interacting with firefighters that are preventing pain, and they're trying to cover up for the exiles, these parts can sort of take over your life and run it for you and stop trusting the self to do what the self is here to do. And our true and core self within us has that capacity to provide the support and care that we need. It's characterized by the 8 C's, which are calm, connected, compassionate, courageous, curious, creative, clear, and confident. And these qualities are within us and within ourselves. But sometimes we need a little bit of help to unblend or to sort of shift back the managers and firefighters to let ourself do its job. For a little bit more information on this therapy, there's an author called Sasha Mardeau who's written a book called Past Tense. It's a graphic memoir, and I'll just pull a few little pictures from her book. She says, I think all of us can identify with having parts. And she gives an example. Let's say a work project is due. You've got one part of you that might be really excited to get out there and do a good job, but there's another part that's afraid of messing up and, you know, being criticized or being blamed. And another part that shrinks back from having to show work and maybe shuts down and is afraid to do this. And then she refers a little bit later in the book to getting in touch with self, greeting a part, saying to this part, you're not alone, I'm here with you, opening up space and finding a place, say in the next slide, the next picture for sadness, where she's allowing the sadness to be there. So that might be another book recommendation. So to access the self, the idea is that if we can help the parts open up and separate and relax, our self actually emerges and knows how to heal parts. Just like our bones know how to heal themselves if they're broken, the self is our birthright, is natural within us and knows how to heal, has healing properties. We don't get the self from the outside or even from good parenting. Everyone has within our inherent nature access to this self. And the self, when we access the self within our system, can take on this very important role of being a compassionate, active leader, and importantly, the inner parent. So guiding suffering parts and helping those parts heal and move forward. So again, self has these qualities: calmness, curiosity, confidence, compassion, clarity, creativity, courage, connectedness, that don't need to be developed or cultivated. They are there if we can access self. And what's really interesting is if you look across the major world religions and spiritual traditions, many of these traditions would say that realizing who we truly are, finding and recognizing our essential self, would be referred to as enlightenment. So I want to go through a couple of examples. I'll talk a little bit about protectors, polarizations, and exiles. So a lot of us can probably relate to something like an inner critic, and that's that little voice in your head that says you made a mistake, nobody likes you, this is pathetic, you're not good enough. That's the inner critic, and that can be thought of as one of our parts that many of us have, and sometimes in a more extreme way. When we take on the idea of IFS and think about how do we relate to that inner critic, you might think about it as a little bit like what Mary Gomes was saying last week about relating to that difficult person. Usually we might have feelings towards the inner critic, like shame, or maybe we don't like it and want it to go away. But from the IFS approach, what we really need to do is approach this inner critic part with compassion and try to understand. So first of all, there are no bad parts. Every part is doing the role that it's doing in order to help us or protect us in some way. Often those ways are misguided and sometimes very unhelpful, but the intention is to protect us. So the inner critic, there might be different motivations, but one possible motivation, if you check in with your inner critic, is trying to protect you from being shamed socially. So if the inner critic can help you find out in advance what your mistakes are and your bad choices, they might be able to help you avoid other people seeing your failures. So maybe the inner critic is helping protect you from social shame. Our inner critic can also motivate us, trying to help us achieve our goals. So if you are at risk of failure and your inner critic points it out in advance and helps motivate you to get your things done so that you don't fail, that can be something helpful, right? Trying to protect you from failure. The inner critic might be trying to keep you safe so you don't say something stupid or awkward to people whose opinions you value. And really importantly, this inner critic was formed when we were young children. We depended on other people's approval. So it's doing the best that it can to protect us with the strategies that it has. So I would like to walk us through a little bit of a self-compassion meditation to, see a little bit what it might be like to befriend the inner critic. So I'm going to ask you if you're comfortable with closing your eyes. That I think would be the most helpful approach. And if not, you might want to find a little spot like down on your desk or table in front of you where you can focus. And just let yourself get comfortable in your seat and take a nice, deep, slow breath. Inhale deeply through your nose. Allow your lungs to expand. And exhale as slowly as you can through your mouth. Allow your body to relax, releasing tension or stress. And just bring your awareness to your heart center. Might be an area in the middle of your chest. And try to imagine a warm, loving light emanating from your heart. Imagine this light spreading through your entire body, bringing kindness and compassion. And imagine your true self as a source of light, warmth, or energy within you. As you breathe, envision this energy expanding. And now bring your mind or your attention to your inner or internal critic. Maybe try to visualize this part or focus on where you notice this part in your body. What do you notice about this part? Can you hear it? Is it close by or far off in the distance? And just notice how you feel towards this part. Do you feel open towards it or closed? Are you curious to know more about it? Or do you feel like you want to avoid it or move away from it? And if a part of you does feel like you want to avoid it, maybe ask that part to wait and step aside so you can express some curiosity and interest in your inner critic. Is your inner critic aware of you and willing to connect with you? So visualize this inner critic And imagine directing the loving energy from yourself, from your heart, toward it, offering compassion and understanding, maybe thanking your inner critic for its role in trying to keep you safe and protect you. And silently repeat these phrases, attempting to direct them to this inner critic. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. May you be at ease. And when you feel ready, take a deep breath. Gently open your eyes, returning to the classroom. See if you can carry those feelings of understanding and compassion for your inner critic with you. And if that was a little hard to do, that's okay. It's just a little experience of what that might be like for the future. So our inner critic is an example of a protector. And another example of how parts might show up for us is in something called polarization. So with polarization, we often have more than one part pulling us in different directions. So maybe you have a really big essay that's due for your class, and you have a manager part that's really eager to write this essay and get it done, right? This kind of overachiever part. But then you've got this other part of you that really wants to avoid this and just watch Netflix. And these two parts, if self is not involved, can get involved between each other in relationship with each other in a tug of war, pulling you into two different directions. And you might end up with the self-critic showing up and telling you how lazy you are and making you feel shame. And then you shut down, or it might be that one side takes over and the other side doesn't get a chance to take over. And so the conflict from this polarization creates a lot of pain for you in the system. And when we relate to these different parts from self, rather than the parts in relation to each other obscuring self, self can really show up and say, on the one hand, I have this need to be productive, but on the other hand, there's a need to rest. And both of these needs are important. And holding each of those needs with compassion, lovingly, with non-judgmental awareness, and making a place for both, you can open up a dialogue between them that might recognize the value of both needs. And this comes to this idea that each part, protectors, managers, firefighters, exiles, all of these parts have reasons for acting the way they do, and they deserve to be welcomed, witnessed, and held. So as we hold our parts lovingly, all of the parts with non-judgmental awareness, this is the space that's needed for them to begin to unburden themselves. So our managers, firefighters, exiles can begin to feel safe with that loving presence of self. And so that allows them to relax, to soften, and to let go of the extreme roles that they've adopted in the service of protection. So there's an idea that all parts are welcome. And Richard Swartz, in his book, No Bad Parts, says that compassion as a spontaneous aspect of self blew my mind, because I'd always assumed and learned that compassion was something you had to develop. There's this idea, especially in some spiritual circles, that you have to build up the muscle of compassion over time because it's not inherent. Again, that's the negative view on human nature at play. To be clear, what I mean by compassion is the ability to be in self with somebody when they're really hurting and feel for them, but not be overwhelmed by their pain. You can only do that if you've done it within yourself. That is, if you can be with your own exiles without blending and being overwhelmed by them, and instead show them compassion and help them. Then you can do the same for someone in pain who's sitting across from you. So thinking about being with exiles, another exercise you might do from IFS is drawing yourself, your adult self now, being with a child part of you that's been activated. And the IFS model has this idea that we can heal attachment wounds through connection. And we, in self, can be with a younger part in a way they needed, with care, curiosity, and compassion. So the question is, how would you nurture her if you were the mother of little you? So I want to share an example in my clinical work at the Family Guidance and Therapy Center, which is where I am now. I work with a lot of parents and their young children, and we do an approach called filial play therapy. And in filial play therapy, there's 30 minutes where the child is the leader. They get to go all around the playroom and do whatever they want to do, unless something's unsafe, and then the parent will set a limit. Otherwise, the child leads and the parent follows. And while the parent is following, they provide reflections. And these reflections are ways, really, it's mind-mindedness, where the parent comments on what their child might be feeling or experiencing while they're playing. Like, oh, you didn't really want that to happen, or that turned out just the way you wanted it to. You're proud of that. It's being with in a loving, non-judgmental way, allowing the child to really feel seen. So in my own therapy right now, I'm participating in IFS as a client, and hopefully you might recognize adult me on one of the pictures, but the other picture is little me. And I've been spending time with a younger part of me in exile around the age of 5. And when I've been spending some time in this inner world, connecting with my younger me in the role of self, it turned out that she wanted to spend some time with me in my playroom. So what we've been doing in my sessions is me spending some time with her and her going around the playroom internally, and me spending time providing mind-mindedness, reflective awareness, and presence for her emotions. And it's been extremely powerful. And so powerful, just the idea of all you have to do is be with and connect and showing up, and just like, that's enough. And really, when we have this distinction from outside in to inside out, it's really not the case that there is such a distinction, because the boundaries, if you look at relational neuropsychology, we see that we're constantly affecting inner and outer all the time, between and within. So how we relate to our own parts, like let's just say I have a hard time with vulnerability, then as a parent, when my child is vulnerable and sad, I might tell them, stop crying, right? Just like we saw in the earlier videos. That was a part of a parent reacting to and inadvertently wounding a part of a child, right? Or if I'm afraid to be angry, then when someone else is angry, I might exhibit fear in relation to their anger. So how we relate to our parts internally becomes how we actually relate to those parts in other people. So when we cultivate self-awareness and self-compassion, that can impact our ability to relate to ourselves internally, but also our ability to connect with the parts of others from self, rather than from our own wounded parts who get triggered by the parts of others. So this comes to the idea of healing our parts through self-attachment. So keeping in mind that it's natural that we all have parts, that's who we are. But for many of us, our parts get forced into extreme roles because at some point in our development, they got hurt. And by offering compassion and kindness and self to these parts in their extreme roles, they're able to transform into their naturally valuable states. So when we help our parts come to trust ourself as the primary caregiver in the system, the self, our internal self, becomes the good attachment figure to all the parts, providing that secure base. So by addressing extreme roles of parts, transforming them, and establishing the self as the primary caretaker, this is the means through which our systems can heal and integrate. So Dick Schwartz, in his book, No Bad Parts, wrote, I need to be able to move this, IFS can be seen as attachment theory taken inside, in the sense that the client's self becomes the good attachment figure to their insecure or avoidant parts. I was initially amazed to discover that when I was able to help clients access their self, they would spontaneously begin to relate to their parts in the loving way that the textbooks on attachment theory prescribed. This was true even for people who had never had good parenting in the first place. Not only would they listen to their young exiles with loving attention and hold them patiently while they cried, they would firmly but lovingly discipline the parts and the roles of inner critics or distractors. Self just knows how to be a good inner leader. So to conclude, looking inside, doing that U-turn and going to our internal parts, we can find healing within ourselves to become the primary caretakers of our own most vulnerable parts. And when we do this, we create a lasting internal security that can form the basis for security in our external relationships. So that concludes my slide presentation. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions. And I can't hear you, but I see you clapping.
Thank you, Jessica. That was great. That was great. Can you hear me?
I can now, yes.
Okay. This is for the recording. Any questions for Jessica, Dr. Hobson? Let me come over to you. Just speak into it. Okay. Just hold it up to your mouth.
So, is the inner critic, is that kind of like the culmination of all three types of the parts, like the exiles, firefighters, and managers, in the internal family systems model, or is it kind of like a separate part of that?
Do I recognize Shane? Are you
Yep,
Shane?
that's me, yeah.
Okay, you're a little blurry, but I recognize you. Yeah, so that's a great question because of time, I didn't have a chance to go into some more nuanced examples, but many times you have multiple parts relating, with each other. And when you start to focus in, something that seems like one part, like I have a client with an OCD part that has like one piece of the OCD is predicting the bad things that might happen, and another is blaming themselves for those, right? Can be, broken up into several parts. So the self-critic can possibly be multiple parts, because there's the part that feels shame when criticized, right? And then there might be a part that shuts down, or a part that goes and does something and gets motivated. And so really what's happening when any part takes on an extreme role is that you have parts forming kind of relationships and alliances with themselves and obscuring the self, right? And so it's the role of the self to help them unblend, to help them to spend time with them and help understand their role and what they're trying to do to be helpful, and maybe the pain that they're trying to protect around it. So there could be a self-critic part that has multiple parts all in relation to each other. Absolutely. And it's a great question.
Other questions for Dr. Hobson?
Loved the presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to present it. What would your advice be to people who come from broken families, families that have experienced a lot of generational trauma, and the potential aversion that they have to having children in the first place because they don't want to pass along those issues that they themselves experienced as children?
Yeah, that's another great question, because in IFS, there's a term called legacy burdens, where some of these wounded parts and protectors get passed on generation by generation. And it's interesting because if you go back to those short video clips that I showed earlier about the parents telling their children, not to have their feelings, these are parts of the parent that are most likely wounded themselves, that are reacting with pain to their child's pain, right? So my advice would really be, like, even for those parents, is kind of self-compassion. I work with a lot of parents and children. We're helping parents learn to practice mindful self-compassion when they're triggered by their children. Actually helps the child with whatever diagnosis they walked in the door with, because so much is, how do we respond to the pain of others, or the distress or the challenges, that make it hard for parents to connect with their children. And certainly there are legacy burdens that, go on across the generations. But I think the message is one of hope, because it's, by it's almost like too simple and good to be true, that just self-compassion and getting to know your parts and working internally can help you be an amazing parent, not only to yourself, but to your children.
We have time for one more, I think, if there's another question from anybody. Anybody? Okay, well, let's give Jessica a great big warm hand for a great
Thanks,
talk.
everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Hobson.